Okay, let's jump in. Hello. Hello to everybody that is joining us. And Carol, hello to you. I am jazzed
I am too.
about this business book club. Yes, very excited. I was telling you off camera that we recently had a chance to see each other not once, but twice. And I had not yet read the book when we saw each other in person. And it's very good. And I'm very happy that you wrote it. And I'm very happy that I had a chance to read it. A couple of bits of housekeeping before we jump in. Let me talk about what else is going on in Business Book Club, folks. We have some very good books coming up. Song of Significance here in like 2 weeks. It is Seth Godin's brand new book, very good. And then Grit by Angela Duckworth, which is both a classic and then also a book that nobody's heard of. So I'm very excited about that one. And then we're going to start Business Book Club in 2024 with the 4-Hour Work Week. I've never actually read the book. I've never read any of Tim Ferriss's books, but it's one of the only newsletters that I get and actually read. So there's that. And then some really exciting books coming up in 2024 Business Book Club. Think Like a Monk by Jay Shetty. We have Adam Grant's brand new book, Hidden Potential, books from Annie Duke and Mel Robbins. So it's going to be amazing. If folks want to join, please do join us in the private Business Book Club session. Those are hosted on Zoom. I don't know why the font is so impossibly small on this slide, but I know. I'll drop the links on LinkedIn for folks. But there's a 7-day free trial on Patreon if folks just want to like dip their feet in the water. But there were a ton of requests last year for an annual membership option, which Patreon doesn't offer. Folks want to get it for themselves for the year, gift it, whatever your fancy is. So that is now available on Gumroad. Okay, let's jump into buyer first. Carol, tell the folks a bit about yourself. And maybe if you wouldn't mind, tell us who you wrote this book for. Like, who do you hope this book will help?
All right, so I'll get one answer can help answer both of those questions.
Okay.
Is that I am an entrepreneur at heart. I grew up in a family of entrepreneurs. It's pretty much wired into my DNA. And when I started my business after getting laid off from corporate America in the Great Recession, which was good 10 years or plus ago, I found myself looking for the sales book that was going to teach me as a business owner how to sell. And I saw a lot of books about tips and tools and tactics and techniques and cold calling things. And I tried them all. And by the way, I hated all of it because I wanted nothing to do with sales, but I had to, feed my kids. I had to buy Christmas presents. I had to figure it out.
Yeah.
And I couldn't understand why what seemed to work for everyone else in all of the books didn't quite work for me. And I didn't realize that the thing that was getting in my way was my own beliefs, my own mindsets towards sales and what sales was all about, that was causing me to not do the things that I knew that I should do in the moments that I should do them, or procrastinate prospecting and all of the other things that we do in sales every day that we kind of self-sabotage ourselves. And so that's why I wrote the book is, what I had to go through in, getting coaching and help and adjusting my mindsets and all of the journey of being an entrepreneur and what that taught me about sales and buyers today. I wanted to write the book for the person that I was 20 years ago. But the real thing was, and I was writing this during the pandemic. And as a lot of you have probably heard the stats about the number of people who left corporate America, either by choice or by getting laid off during the pandemic, and then the huge percentage of those that went and started their own business, and the even percentage of those that were women. And I'm like, oh my God, we are in the same place that we were back in 2007 when I first started my business. And everyone's at that point now where they're trying to decide, do I have what it takes to continue doing my own thing? Or should I go get the 4-letter word, the job? And so that's why I wanted the book to come out. And what I hope it does for people is give them a different perspective on what is actually getting in their way of their sales success, and actually shift not just the narrative, but the perspective of sales. Because I see sales as a noble profession. 7 out of 10 people don't. And that's affecting the way that it's executed on. And I think that's the thing that we're not talking about in sales today, and why we're still seeing the same results, despite the fact that we spend, according to Harvard Business Review, like $70 billion a year in sales training, and why managers are like, training doesn't work because it doesn't stick. This is why.
Yeah. Oh, it's so true. And I know that one of the first things that we bonded on is pride in being a sales professional,
Yeah.
in really believing that sales is a craft and it should be treated that way. But I'd love to hear from folks. Drop a comment, or maybe hit that support, that love emoji if you found that so relatable, because you also know at some point in your career you self-sabotaged. Maybe you didn't believe what you were selling really helped people. Maybe you didn't believe in yourself, that you deserved to take up somebody else's time or make that ask of them, because I know that was something early in the book that resonated with me. And you mentioned right before we went live that this was the book that you wish somebody had handed you 20 years ago. And that, like, very much like Leslie early in her career was like, oh, I don't want to be a bother. And it took me a while to pivot my mindset into, you're not a bother. You've done your research. You know that this is something that this person is going to get tremendous value from. You deserve an opportunity to, like, you are as worth their time as anybody else is.
Yeah.
But it's a mindset.
It really is. And the thing is there are specific mindsets, specific beliefs that we grew up with, that we've come to believe because of the way that, we have grown up with these things. And so that perspective of sales then influences, what all the psychology points to. What you believe about something is how you will do something. You think it, you behave that way, you get a result. And so if we think negatively about sales, or we have a perception of sales that's really all about us, about what we're getting out of it, what people think of us, how much of a commission we're going to make, where it's going to put us on the leaderboards, what we're going to be able to do with the money. Of course, these are things, human nature. We think about ourselves first, but buyers sense that. And that's what's setting us up for some of the mistakes, let's say, that we're making in sales today. How to be brave like Carol's aunt. Elizabeth said, oh, my grandmother. Yes, my grandmother. So Elizabeth is talking about a story in the book. So, we all have these experiences, right? Growing up. And my sales role model, if you will, was my grandma Mahoney. And she owned one of the first women-owned real estate brokerages in the state of Massachusetts in the 70s. And, I lived in Maine in the winters and in the fall, because that's where I went to school. And then I summered in Boston in Massachusetts. Like, it was completely reverse of what most people did. And so we got dragged to every open house, every networking event. Like, she had us introducing ourselves at networking events at like 9 years old. I was balancing the books in her agency at 12. Like, I didn't have, dress up dolls. I had business cards. Like, I was the secretary. That was my goal in life at 9 years old. But then she was also she was so embarrassing. Oh my God. She would go into restaurants and she would like hand out her business cards to everybody while they're still eating, handing out her business cards, putting them on the
hustling.
And she's asking these most uncomfortable questions with the worst Boston accent. Oh, honey, just park your car over by the harbor. I've got this great view. How much is hubby making now? And it's like, oh my God, I want to disappear. And so she was gritty. She was resilient. She was tenacious. She let nothing stand in her way. Most of our people called her this, salesy ways. She always got what she wanted, though.
I love that.
And so I wanted to be my grandma Mahoney. But then, we've also had those bad sales experiences that have shaped a perception, like the used car sales experience, like everyone's had. Well, I lived with that used car salesperson. And yes, it's as horrible as it sounded. And that also shaped my perception of sales. So when we get into sales, like, all right, in the chat pane, I would love to see anybody who, as a kid, you dressed up for Halloween as a salesperson because that's what you wanted to be when you grew up.
Yeah, I don't know if we're gonna get very many people. Yeah, who's dressing their kid up this year as a salesperson? Like, probably not. But let's stay on that sales mindset piece a bit, because earlier in the book you talk about changing your sales mindset, and you share that the first step is to reflect on your sales origin story. Yeah. So I would, if people have them, I would love to hear some sales origin stories in the comments, or maybe one of the prompts that you gave in the book that I really liked was, when you think about what it takes to be successful in sales, what do you think, and is that what you're doing? Well, folks are maybe sharing their sales origin stories or pictures of their kids dressed as a sales professional for Halloween. Can you give us an overview, Carol, of how those sales origin stories, whether it's your grandma as the realtor or whether it's that used car salesman, uncle, whoever it is, how do they impact our beliefs?
So if you think of therapy, so the method of
Therapy. That's my answer to so many things, Carol.
yeah, therapy. It's just
Therapy.
therapy. But the approach that I take to it is a cognitive behavioral approach to sales performance. And so what that means is identifying what are the beliefs that I have that are creating a mindset that is getting in my way. And so the sales origin story is first understanding what do I believe about sales? What is sales all about? When I go into the act or think about the activities of selling, what do I think is successful? So, for example, Harvard Business School students were getting coached. I was coaching them on, their sales conversations, and they went into their pitches too early. They were not asking any questions. They were giving discounts like right off the bat, not asking a single question. By the way, not good sales behavior. And when I asked them and gave them some pushback, their response was, well, isn't that what a good salesperson is supposed to do? Give the value proposition, make the pitch, and ask for the business, because that's what they believed. So somewhere in their sales origin story and their experience, maybe it was their father or grandfather who was the salesperson, and like me, going around and seeing how they sold. And so they figured they're a good salesperson. They fed their family, so that's what I need to do. It's the adult learning model, and actually the learning model is we look at things that we see as successful when we're trying to learn a new behavior. And so we model that behavior. And so the thing of it is kind of crazy is when we model the behaviors of others, we take on those beliefs of that's what good looks like. And then that then becomes our behaviors and actions, except our buyers are changing the dynamics of sales today. So the models that we're looking at are the pushy, sleazy tactics that we're applying to today's technology. It's why we're still getting spammed on LinkedIn with these automated messages and pitch slaps, because that's the beliefs about sales acting in the behaviors.
I love this comment from Amanda. It made me laugh. I can just picture her as a little kid carrying around. But you're so right. And you know what I think is really interesting, Carol, is that I did not have any salespeople in my life. That was just not the profession of anybody in my family. And I have a huge Italian family, but they were all out there doing different stuff. And so my conception of what it was to be a salesperson all came from TVs. And I will age myself here a little bit. I was a child of the 80s.
Yes.
So you imagine, like, I'm coming to age in like the 90s, early 2000s, and every movie and TV show that depicted salespeople never take no for an answer.
Always
Oh my God. Yes. Like,
tell me this pen.
You get fired. They were bad. And I accidentally got into sales because I needed to pay my rent. I feel like that's a fairly common story of how people find themselves in this profession. But I absolutely had those sorts of limiting mindsets. I had shame about the fact that I was doing sales as a job. And it was because the only narrative that I'd ever heard about sales was that there are people that lie and cheat and scam and worse. And it was a big mindset. It was a big mindset shift for sure.
So this is what happens this is what happened with me and with most people is that we see that and we don't want to be that, but we have to somehow figure out a way to do that so that we can pay our rent. And it creates this, what psychologists call a cognitive dissonance in us. We're at war with ourselves. And that's part of the problem is that we haven't had solid research until the last, I'd say, decade or so on what it actually takes to be a good salesperson using psychology, neuroscience, data, as well as the decision science behind how people make their decisions today with the internet. And that was my hope for this book, just to bring those two things together so that the person, yes, entering sales and business, but even experienced salespeople are probably finding themselves at a place where they're like, okay, whatever I was doing last year is not working. It's not cutting it. I'm hitting a wall and I feel like I'm a newbie all over again. I've had a lot of them say that to me. And so this is for them as well. And the thing is, these are the fundamentals. Like the fundamentals are the things where everything comes from. Mastering the mindsets that are going to support you in the execution of anything is how you adapt to today's buyer. And it's going to keep happening faster and faster.
I love that. So let's talk about one of the fundamentals in sales, really in any profession. In the chapter Follow the New Golden Rule, you talk about communication clarity and share that when you are truly buyer first, it is easier to write good sales and marketing messages. You already hinted to how bad most messages are.
Right.
This chapter especially resonated with me because it speaks to my own sales methodology, which is earn the right. So many times during the book, I found myself nodding, being like, yeah, Carol gets it. But earn the right boils down to asking yourself, what have I done to earn the right to make this ask of my prospect? And that can be just asking them to read a cold email through to, asking them to take that discovery call or consider your prospect. But if you don't have an answer to that, like if you've not done something to earn the right to make that ask of them, you better go back to the drawing board. And I would say that there are a lot of maybe skill sets, soft and hard skill sets that sales pros are struggling with. But a good way to lump them together is under that umbrella of buyer centricity.
Mm-hmm.
Here, I'm going to make a kind of challenging ask of you because buyer centricity it's squishy, right?
Yeah.
There's so many things that fall into it. We have folks listening to this that are like, sure, great ladies, but what can I do tomorrow to course correct? Do you have one or two like super tactical tips for folks?
Yes. And I love super tactical things that you can do tomorrow because it sets you up for quick wins, which is going to help your team to adapt to change and build confidence in that.
Yeah.
So let's take the marketing messaging, for example. So one of the exercises I think I give in the book is called the wee factor. So take your standard copy, look at from headline to how you address it to the first 3 sentences of it, which hopefully it isn't any longer than that. And to start with. And then I want you to count how many times you say I, me, we, our, and the company name or the company solution. Okay. Then tally that against the number of times you say you, yours, because, and that means. Those are buyer-centric words. And what I typically find happening when I look at the first versions of copy, you just even say it's templates for your cadences that you should hopefully be plugging in bits of research and insights and personalization into, is that it's usually a ratio of like 3 to 1 on average, where there's one buyer-centric word and there's, the rest of it is all about us. So you've weed all over yourself and nobody wants that. So that's one very quick and easy way to be able to do that. It applies to web copy. It applies to your scripts that you're using. It applies to your email cadences. It applies to your social messages even.
Yeah.
We always like to talk about I and me and we and our, and there's a reason for that, but that's another tip. And so the other thing that I would say is looking at is look at the questions that you're asking. Like I think one of the exercises in the book is list your top 5 sales questions. Now I want you to evaluate those questions, like go for a walk and then come back and then look at those and ask yourself the question, what does this information give my buyer? Does this question serve me and what I want to find out so that I can pitch my solution? Or is this a question that helps the buyer learn something or helps us both to learn something about their current situation, impact, or challenges and goals? And a lot of times what I find happening is that salespeople have tons of questions. Most of them have to do with what they want to know.
Ooh.
And a lot of them don't have to do with, like, they don't include the questions that might bring up objections or reason why this might not be a fit for them. They're all questions where that leads to the buyer saying, yes, help me with that.
Oh, I love that. So much there. So 2 tactical tips, but there's so much meat there. On the first tip, that is also deeply, deeply data backed. I am lucky enough to be an advisor for a company called Reggie. And so I get to look behind the curtains at about like 1 million email data points a month. And if your emails don't adhere to a 1 to 3 ratio, just like you said, if you are not leading with the conversation that is about them and you're making it about you instead, which go into your inbox, folks. What are most of the emails? I saw. I'm your account executive at, we do, here's our feed. That's how most emails are written. So that simple pivot, which it is a simple pivot because it is so easy to go through and count I's versus U's in an email. I love that one. I think that is something that people can audit after this call, you know,
Right away.
tomorrow. Yeah, I love that. And I think the questions piece is so smart as well. Forrester came out with some really interesting data at the beginning of the year that said that our customers are actually not just willing, but interested in spending time with us over the phone as long as we make it matter to them.
Mm-hmm.
And what so few sellers do is research appropriately and prepare before a call.
Mm-hmm.
And then think about how they can show up to that call with insights that their buyer gives a heck about. Yeah.
Yeah.
Ooh, so good.
And the few that do are the ones that are winning trust of buyers in bigger ways. And it's amazing the shift that happens with just those two little changes. And they seem little, but it's so ingrained in us that it's I was on a call earlier today and they're like, you know, there's all this legacy knowledge that how do I get them to be willing to unlearn the things that we're so dug into, you know, and then we start talking about behavior change and even deeper into psychology. And then I'm totally going to nerd out. So
It's so true, though. I was writing some content today, and I wrote a post that will get published at some point about how important it is that we question best practice.
yes,
Because what just because it was best practice doesn't mean it is best practice. Often, because it became best practice, everybody started doing it, and then our buyers were like, "Ew, this is gross."
Yeah,
and then it stops working.
Yeah. Like email was the thing and snail mail was not the thing. Now snail mail is the thing because everybody's in email. It's like when all of the masses go this way, our buyers are like, yeah, I'm good. I'm over here.
It's true. It's true. Although I'm like ride or die on a handwritten note.
Oh, I am too. And I will, and I try to do them as much as I possibly can, but it's something like, it's one of those things. It's a habit you have to develop.
Yeah. It's so true. One tip that you didn't mention here on our call, but that you do mention in the book is Google, the power of Google.
My gosh. Yes.
Which I know it seems kind of silly to say, but I kind of felt like a spark of joy because like talking about something that I've been ride or die for because it has worked for me my entire career and continues to work. Is just a well orchestrated Google search. And it's just kind of refreshing to know I'm not the only seller that is still doing it.
I got through college that way. Like I got through, I mean, in high school, we didn't have Google. So it wasn't until like my second time in college that as an adult that we had Google. And I was like, why are people not leveraging this more? Like, and so just being able to understand how it just works. And then being able to drill down your searches from there so that you can prepare and simply, you know, Googling your buyer. One of my favorite things I have salespeople do is to create alerts for, you know, who are their target buyers and the news in their company. But then I want you to become so ingrained in what their role is that you could apply for their job. Know what metrics they're measured by, know what initiatives that they're doing, you know, like what kind of education do they have to go through to get this? How many years of experience is required? What's expected of them? How long is the average tenure? You know, all of these are things that get to know and understand what kind of an environment and what kind of pressure is my buyer under when they're dealing with this particular problem. How are they going to be measured? What are the typical things that everybody else is trying? You know, what are the typical vendors they use and what are the G2 reviews about those? Where's the gaps that we can help fill in? That's where you start finding those insights. But, you know, if you're just doing a general search for the company and then going to their About Us page on the website and then maybe looking at the hierarchy, and that's usually the extent of the research I see sellers do today, then you're not going to be able to find those little nuggets of gold that's going to set you apart from everybody else who's spamming them with hey, this is our new offer.
Oh, it's so true. One of this is kind of an aside, but one of my favorite things to make sure I always know about my ICP is what's their average tenure. Because I've sold to folks that have that, like, you know, marketing sales average, like 12 to 18 month tenure. I've also sold to folks that have an average tenure of 20 years plus. And it is a different mindset on how quickly they're willing to move and how evergreen they view a problem as. I dropped a infographic on Google Alerts. I'm also a huge fan of Google Alerts. And here's the brass tacks, folks. I know some of you out there are like, well, you can pay for intent data. you're in the rare air. Very few people have access to intent data. Very few organizations invest in intent data. And even if you do have intent data, I still would recommend Google Alerts. And to your point about going deeper, it is now easier than ever to do that. Like there's a Bard plugin for Google now that will help you do this if you just ask it, like if you just ask for help.
That's basically what I do. That's my first foray into AI was like, okay, research. Like next book research is going to be so much easier.
I love this question.
That is an awesome question,
Amanda. Yeah, it's really good. You want to tackle it?
Yes. So the internal processes, I've worked with a number of companies that are publicly traded companies that they have these set processes that are in place. And so the tactical execution can be a challenge. And I'll give you an example, and I won't name companies. Very large CRM company had a account executive that was working like multi-million-dollar deals. And it was coming up against the end of quarter, and they, VP needed to meet the number. Everybody knows where this is going, right? And the VP's like, give them a discount so they can get it in this quarter. Now they'd already set up timelines and milestones and expectations and approvals and write-offs. And this guy knows that if he goes to his contact and says, I need to see if I can give you a 25% discount to accelerate this, he's going to everything's going to get blown up. He knows that this is going to happen. And so I was coaching him through this. And as we were talking through it, I said, there's a number of ways that you can handle this. One is you can just flat out, tell your VP, look, if we do this, we're going to blow the whole deal and it's going to delay even longer. And what he's faced with right now is that he needs to meet a number. So find a different deal or a different couple of deals to help him out so that he takes the pressure off of this one deal, because he sees this huge number and that's how he's going to get himself out of this. So that's one way you can handle it. The other way that you could possibly handle this is, depending on the relationship that you have with your point of contact or your champion, is to be just completely transparent with them, because they probably know that this is going to happen. They know how these things go, and say, look, I'm under pressure from my boss to try to get this to come in earlier. I know that we have other timelines and everything else in place, but I have to at least ask, is this even a possibility that we could work something out? And that way you're giving them the option instead of the hard pitch. And so it's finding a way to be transparent with your buyer if you can't make some accommodations for the other internal processes. I am an advocate of always standing up for what's best for your buyer. Rarely do people get fired for that, though I'm sure it happens in some organizations. And that's the case, it's probably not the organization for you anyway. Best advice I ever got was just get out of there. So I'll share that with all of you. But as far as the rest of it goes, is I find being completely transparent about it is going to help you to navigate those internal processes while being an advocate for your buyer first and foremost, and advocate for the relationship for the entire process that you've built, while also validating and understanding that this is I know it's an important process and I want to go through due diligence in the right channels, but this is what's best for the buyer and I will fight for this.
That is great advice and very realistic advice, because I have found myself in that situation more than once, and I have both put my foot down, I have caved and put external sales pressure on my buyer when it felt bad and I knew it was the wrong thing to do. And I have also gone to my buyer with total transparency, and I bet you can guess out of those 3 strategies, which 2 got deals across the line and which one made deals blow up in my face.
Right.
Hint, folks, it was the one where I went back and actually offered the discount. And to be fair, I'm not working on $1 million deals, but I am working on 50 to 100K. I mean, they're not small potatoes ACV. So yeah, excellent advice. Let's switch gears a little bit. And this is kind of a self-serving question, because I constantly in the back of my mind have the idea of courses.
Yes.
Everybody, passive income, and I don't know, it feels like something I should do. I haven't done it, but in chapter 6, Uncover Your MVPs, you talk about launching your first course. And I have to imagine that there's somebody else on this call that, like me, is thinking about passive income. It's a question I get asked a lot. And I'm like, I don't know the answer, Like I haven't gotten it right. But I was wondering if you could share with folks, Carol, like what went wrong with launching your first course, and what would you tell folks listening that want to launch theirs to help them get it right?
Yes. And I use the course as an example of how to use basically feedback and input from your buyers on what it should include and how it should be designed and structured and priced in terms. And basically, the whole thing is based on the conversations and the input you get back from your buyers. Now, this applies to courses, this applies to training programs, this applies to software development. I work with a lot of startup founders, and this is the process that we're using for them to find their first beta customers, their early evangelists. It applies to anything, even sometimes in manufacturing, depending on the scope of things. You can make customized things for people, or at the very least, be able to articulate a solution in a way that appeals to those specific things that are for them, so that it's not your standard pitch. So for online courses, I also have gone down that rabbit hole, the whole passive income idea. I'm not getting any younger. I need to figure out a way for me to keep expanding, and doing things and not have it only the 24 hours in a day that I have. And also at the same time, I found myself repeating myself a lot in my training, the things in the coaching that I was doing. And so I'm like, okay, there's got to be some way that I can just, put the groups of people with the same question in the same place at the same time. And I thought, all right, I know what it is that they're wondering. And so I'm just going to go through, and we've all done this. We go away into our bat cave, and we start designing the ultimate thing that's going to be our life's work. This is going to hit the world, and it's going to be wonderful, and nobody cares. Yeah. We spent all of this time and energy and money in trying to develop it because, again, we're
telling my story.
We're kind of making it all about us again. And so what I propose, and this is one of the things that I learned from Danny Inney and his sale builder course, I forget what it's called, but actually going out and getting the input and asking the discovery questions and diving deeper into it, and then asking people, hey, can I keep you in the loop as to what I come up with? Yeah. And then asking those people to be in your beta group and doing it live. Now, I've gone down the path of should I, record these things and stuff like that, and maybe I'll go down that path at some point, but what I have found is that my people get the most value when we're doing live things like this, and then having group coaching where we're all together live at the same place in the same time. Because you know what? There's a million courses out there, and the percentage of people that actually go through them are about the same as the percentage of people that buy a book and actually read it. Okay, I said it.
Which I know is about 3%.
Exactly. So if you really want to make and build something that's going to have value for people and also allow you to grow and scale your platform and your revenue, I recommend doing courses live with some kind of a group coaching component or training component in that, because it also follows best practices for behavior change and how people learn, just FYI. But getting that input early on, and it's not like, okay, you've done it once and then you're done. This is a continuous cycle. Yeah. Like every 6 months, I'm seeking feedback from both my current customers, my past customers, people who I think might be my future customers, and looking at, how are they thinking about things now? What are the things that they're trying? Of course, AI is making things happen even faster. And so to keep in tune with what's going on, we have to get really good at asking discovery questions and adding value so that people want to keep engaging with us. And then the thing that I found that happened is that instead of me trying to push something out into the world with every effort and willpower that I had, it was much easier to find the people who wanted to share their thoughts and collaborate with me and build something together. And that's the whole premise of collaborative selling, is building something together with people so that it's what they actually need.
You know what's really interesting about the process that you just described for courses is that I once made the truly absurd choice to be employee number one at a startup. And my job was to create the MVP. And what you just described so closely mirrors the process that I went through in creating the MVP. I reached out to people who may or may not be customers, may be like tangential, adjacent to customers. And I just asked so many questions. And then I created something that I thought I kind of got right based on what they told me. And then I went back and was like, oh, would you mind just spending a little bit more time with me so I can sense check this and ask more questions? And I think I did a pretty freaking good job, because post-launch, we took it to 500K in revenue in 9 months. And that is impressive, I think, for a bootstrap startup. But let's talk about questions.
Yes, because that is the root of the MVP, and I am
Yeah.
huge fan of the lean startup, and that's where the whole MVP kind of concept came to me from. But it's all based on the questions that you ask, because that's the data you're going to get back. That is, as I was talking earlier, like when you ask good questions, good clarification questions, good targeted questions based on research and understanding of the buyer, those are the kinds of questions that people like to answer. And it doesn't feel like an interrogation. It doesn't feel like you're going through a checklist. It feels like a back and forth conversation between two colleagues, two experts. And here's the other part of it is not only does that help you to better understand your buyers, it also helps your buyers to change their minds.
And one of my favorite parts about questions,
yes,
they allow the buyer to convince themselves that they have a problem worth solving. I genuinely, people are like, what's your, key? What's your silver bullet to success? I'm like, oh, I'm just like really good at asking questions. And I didn't even know that was this, like back to the beginning of our call on sales origins. I didn't even know that was a sales superpower, but I was a speech and debate nerd. And then I was a Model United Nations nerd. So I had years and years of practice.
Yeah.
Asking questions. That was the basis of all of that. And then
I never connected the debate club to it because I was also in the debate club in high school, and that was what I loved about it was the question asking.
Or Lincoln Douglas.
Oh yes, so there's a game in the book that we call the question and periods game, which I learned from another mentor, and we turned it into a drinking game for New Year's Eve. So the whole and the kids got involved, but they didn't take any shots. They just got into the game. So the whole idea is you answer questions.
I love how you clarify that the kids didn't take any shots.
Thank you. We're live, right? So yeah.
I invite Carol on book club. She gets canceled right after.
Yeah, exactly. But you answer a question with a question, and it's not just like this. You can't just answer any question with a question. It has to be relative to the question that was asked, right? So it's a continuing thread. What do you want for dinner? Well, what do you feel like having for dinner? Do you want chicken or pork? Like there's a continuing thread. It's not like, what's the weather? Yeah, what's 5 + 2? Makes no sense. And the person who ends the conversation with a period, it loses, it has to take a shot. And so I got my husband doing it. He does it to his coworkers. Sorry, coworkers. Everybody in my family does it. And like, even my kids are like, are we doing it now? Are we playing the game? Or can you just answer the question?
Ooh, I am going to steal that.
Do it.
Because
everything's borrowed from someone else at some point.
I mean, it's so true. It's so true. But I have an immediate application for it because I do a lot of sales training as part of my engagements with my clients. Yeah. And one of my most popular sessions, surprise, surprise, is objection handling. Like, how do we handle? And then it's an entire training on questions. Like, we don't really talk about
practice. All of this is just practice. And so I have people who will come to me and BDRs that are new in companies or people who have just started their businesses or startup founders that don't have any customers or prospects yet. They're like, how am I supposed to practice? I don't have anybody to practice with. I'm like, good, because I don't want you practicing on your buyers. They deserve more than that. I want you to practice on everybody around you. Your cat, your dog, your husband, your Uber driver, your waiter, your waitress, your bartender, the person that checks you in at the hotel. There are people around you everywhere. You just have to open your mouth and engage. And you know what? You'll probably find that people are going to start telling you your life stories the better you get at asking questions, just full disclosure. And so it's really about you get good at asking questions because of curiosity. It's also about intent. Like we were talking about examining our sales questions earlier. What's the intent of your questions? Is it to get what you want, or is it to learn, understand, and empathize with someone else and help to connect the dots?
Yeah.
That's a different intent. All of these things can be used for good or for evil. Intent is the difference.
Intent. Jeff Majorek would love that because that's something that he talks about all the time. We did Chris Voss, I don't know, a long time ago. Like it was one of the very first books, like 2 years ago. And he was like, I don't know. I feel like a lot of people read that book and then use it to actively and I love that book. It was one of my favorite sales books, but it is the intent. You can read that book and your takeaway can be, wow, what a compelling opportunity to create more meaningful connections with my buyers. Or you can read that book and you can be like, wow, I got these suckers.
Yeah. Or like the Challenger sale. Your intent could be to learn everything you can about your buyer to offer them an insight that changes the way that they think or challenges the way that they think. Or it could be you're just the jerk that asks questions to get in their face in front of their entire team. All out
Oh
of
my
10.
God. Such an aside, but the amount of times I interview people and I'm like, so like, what's your sales philosophy? And they're like, oh, challenger sale. And I'm like, tell me what that means. And 80% of them then give me an example that is just them like bullying a prospect. I'm like, oh, that's not it.
Yeah.
I'm also curious if we have anybody else besides me on this call and Carol that we're in debate. Anybody else do Lincoln
Or some
Douglas?
other weird thing that you in high school now are like, oh my gosh, that's why I'm so good at this part of sales because I was the
Totally.
captain of the basketball team. Like, what's the weird thing?
Like
that
the thing that's like clicks, that clicks now. For me, it was definitely using my childhood to practice rhetoric because I'm super cool. Okay, let's keep talking about questions though, because I do think that they are so important. And there is a part of the book where you talk about questions in 3 phrases. I thought it was brilliant. And I want you to tell folks, because maybe they haven't read it yet, maybe they haven't quite got their copy of Buy It First. What is the questions in 3 phrases concept and why is it so important?
So the phased questions, the first 3 phases of questions are, I kind of look at it as like peeling an onion. You can peel one layer at a time. Also, I call them phases and not layers, because layers we think of like, here's this layer and then the next layer. It's like steps in a process. But the reality is that questions, they kind of come in and out and they're circular and like people don't think linearly. We're all over the place. And so sometimes our questions are as well. But if we can have an understanding of the different phases of questioning, kind of how we're drilling down, getting clarification on things, then that makes it easier to be able to weave in and out of certain types of questions. So for example, the first phase or layer of questions, if you will, is where kind of what's going on right now. What's the event that's caused them to start looking? What are they looking for? What's the research that they've already done? Why is this something that they're looking into right now? Who else is impacted or involved by this? Kind of getting an understanding of what's going on right now. What's their environment? What do they already know? So that we can get on the same page with them and meet them where they're at.
And I will just add for folks, because they might not be picking up this nuance, and I think it's important that every single question that Carol just asked is an open-ended question.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that seems simple, but so much of this book, like so much of why it's powerful, is that it really speaks to the things that we are still getting wrong, that are some of the most important things to get right. So I'm gonna point people to that fact. I'm sorry to interrupt you. Keep going with your brilliance.
And it's also important to remember, like, the style of questions. So most of the time at the beginning of conversations, you want to rely more on open-ended questions because you're uncovering things, you're discovering things, you're connecting dots, right? And so like yes or no questions, it's like, okay, we can go this way or we can go this way. This is what's the playing field? Who are the players on the field? What's the rules of the game? And what's the goal and what's the score? I'm sorry to get into football, but it's the season. And so with that, then understanding, okay, so here's the current play. These are the plays that we've tried. This is the people that we have. These are the injuries on the team. And this is what we're facing on the other side. And we think that the competition is going to be doing. And this is impacting us in this way. So that's kind of the next phase of questions is, so first, what's going on? What's the issues? What is the research? Who's involved? Who's impacted? And then it's okay, why is this even a problem? And getting into what is it that they've tried, what's worked, what hasn't worked, why do they think that is, who else is this impacting, shareholders, stockholders, what are some of the obstacles that have been in their way in the past when they've tried to either bring on a vendor or a consultant or do some kind of a change in the organization, and how are we going to work through those things when or if this happens again. And so that's kind of all right, here's the current status quo, here's the problem and all of the things that rolls up into that. And then it's like, okay, why does this even matter anyway? Like, you've been going along all of this time. You've been in business this long. Why is this an issue that you need to fix now? What's the impact if you don't fix it? What's the opportunity if you do? You got to have the gap and the contrast there. And then starting to understand what's the decision criteria? How are you going to compare your vendors? What's the timelines, the expectations? Are those realistic? And establishing milestones with them. You can only ask that through open-ended questions. And then when you get into demonstrations and proposals and terms and conditions, you've already mapped all of that out together through your open-ended phase questions. So it becomes a lot easier and a lot more natural to then know when to ask for the business, because you've already built out timelines. You understand the impacts. And hopefully at this point, if you've done your job well with these questions, you've understood if they're even willing to make a decision and what might get in the way of that, to the point of like the jolt effect. What might get in their way? How do we take the risk off the table for them so that they can actually solve this problem that they've been dealing with for so long and haven't been able to get through? Because if they could have done it on their own, they would have at this point, and they wouldn't need us.
Yeah, I loved that. I dropped this question as well. This is one of my favorite questions. And considering that we are, let's be honest, we're in Q4, folks are probably feeling a bit up against it. This is one of my favorite questions. Like, you're in that phase 2 and you're really like, where are we going from here to get this partnership done? Getting clarity on their priorities to make sure that you want, because like, to your point, why is it worth solving now?
Yeah.
And often when we get priorities from folks, they'll talk about talent, or they'll talk about those sort of like, I'm sorry if you sell a talent solution, but they're often like very evergreen, difficult to solve problems. So it's like, why is it suddenly so important that you're going to take action against it now? And I love this type of question to figure out what's important now versus just what's important. So go ahead.
Yeah. Well, and here's the thing with this is that we all have been taught to qualify. Why would they do this? Why should they say yes? And what I'm trying to get across to people is you should actually be seeking to disqualify. Why wouldn't they be successful? What's standing in their way? What are the things that no one else is telling them that they need to look out for down the road? And even, I know sales managers out there are going to cringe because it's Q4, telling them we're not the right fit for you.
100%. 100%. Carol, the amount of times I wish I had like a percentage of pipeline, but if I was going to estimate, I would bet that it is like 20 to 30% of my pipeline of millions and millions of revenue close that were folks that I said no or not right now. And that they came back when it was that time, or they came back when they were at another organization and they remembered me because I was the only vendor that was like, actually, let me point you to this, or actually, I think you can do this for free. Like, don't pay for this. And even like one of the biggest deals I've ever won with a 6-figure deal with a Fortune 10 company, a referral. It was from a referral on somebody that didn't buy. They didn't buy because it wasn't the right time for them, but they were at a gathering and this woman was saying all the things that would have made it a right time. And they were a referral. It's kind of wild.
That is, and I've had that happen too. I was like, what? Really? They're not a client. They said But this, as you were describing that too, I was also in the back of my mind remembering, and just in the chat pane, if anyone has ever had this happen to you, where someone says, if I don't hear back from you by XYZ date, I'm going to close your file.
Yuck.
You've gotten all that, right? And it's kind of like, it's like this, it's again, intent behind using the no. Like people will say, oh, well, you know, if you want them to come back to you, then you just tell them no, and then they'll come back to you. But buyers are smarter than we give them credit for, because they know as soon as they say, well, actually, yeah, now I'm interested, that you're going to miraculously open their file again.
And like, what does that even mean? What, like, it's an electronic document. You mean you open a tab? Like, is that too much to ask of you?
Exactly. And it drives me crazy that the mindset of that still exists today. So when I say go for the no or disqualify, I mean, because your job is to help a buyer make a decision in their best interest, not yours. And so that's like, when you think about the tactics that are behind it, you can't do that. You can't. You just can't. Stop.
It's so true. Okay. We only have a few minutes left, and I want to dig into 2 more topics.
Yes.
Before we wrap today. One is the importance of repeatable processes, and one is goal setting. I know those are generally hot topics. They are also ones that I am particularly passionate about, and I got to pick the question. So here we are. On page 250, you say the absence of a documented process makes it impossible to repeat success or experiment to get success. Brilliant words. I agree. I say this until I'm blue in the face. You cannot scale until you first have repeatability. But let me ask you this, Carol.
Yeah.
Because I know we have folks on this call who are ICs, or maybe they're in leadership, but they're not the CRO or the CEO. Like kind of Amanda hinted at, like we want to make change, but maybe there's some hierarchy or bureaucracy holding us back. If you don't lead the sales strategy, but you want to do something tomorrow that can help you be more, help you create those buyer-centered, repeatable processes, what's one thing that you can build into your daily workflows?
So one of the things you can build into your daily workflows is, you can do this in Google Docs or whatever online document that you have, is at the end of the day, sit down and write out, what are the common things that I heard from my buyers today? What were the roles that they were in? What are the common events that were going on? And if you do that at the end of every day, and then take a look at that at every week and do that for, let's say, a month, then you're going to start to have already built out what a buyer persona should look like, and the questions that you need to ask, and the information and content that you need to align to help them to move them along their decision-making process, and the stages that they go through. So simply by taking notes at the end of each day, summarizing those each week, and then looking for those patterns, and then, basically kind of, reading it out to the most basic forms, that's documenting a process and learnings. And like I have all of these little notebooks behind. I do it in a physical notebook, pen and paper. And then exactly. So at trade shows, I'm like the one at the booth that I'm grabbing all of the notebooks, because that's how I do my planning and documentation. And then I put it online. So
we're too much alike. It's kind of terrifying.
Really scary. I think we both like Fresno rosés too. So there's that. So,
I like that tip because it's accessible. It's not like block off your whole day and build this. It's just like, hey, just step by step, like just start documenting things, and the outcome will ultimately be that clarity that you can make into a repeatable process that then you can start testing and you can start iterating on. I love that. Wise words, very wise words. The other topic that I wanted to touch on before we jump is goal setting. It's another of my favorite topics. I know as we wrap Q4 and folks head into to a new year, that it's going to be something that there's a lot of conversations happening around. And it was yet another time as I read this book that I was like vigorously nodding my head in agreement. You share that only 45% of professional sellers have personally meaningful goals written down and track for progress. I found that shocking because I thought it was so high. I don't believe you. I don't. 45% doesn't sound realistic. Not what I'm seeing. And it's something I talk about a lot because I have multiple GROW certifications. It's like a performance coaching. Yeah. So I run a lot of goal setting workshops for reps, and I feel like it's like 1 or 2 out of 10 folks. With that being said, I think that a culprit of bad goal setting is that most folks don't understand the difference between like a hope and a dream and an actual goal. And so what I really loved about this section of the book is your focus on having a plan and tracking for progress. So maybe if you can leave our listeners with one last call to action, how can they be better at goal setting? Like for folks that are committed to really setting themselves up for success, what is something that they can do to plan and track and achieve?
Yeah. So this is actually one of my favorite exercises to go through. And just before I came down to do this call, my husband came home and he saw that I had my next goals all laid out on the kitchen table, and he's looking through them. What that looks like for us is I've taken the graph paper out and designed what the kitchen remodel and the addition and the garage with my bigger office and studio is going to look like. And what are all of the dimensions of that? And where's the furniture going to go? Like I have drawn it out. And now my next step is, okay, I have a general idea of what it's going to cost. So now I've got to go and get costs. And then I've got to go to the town and see if they're going to even let me do it. But for me, goal setting, something that's personally meaningful, whether it's to be the best at your job, because that's a personally meaningful goal. That is something you can measure. That means being at the top of your leaderboard. That means whatever that means. If that means something to you because you want to know that you have validated that you can do something, that's a personally meaningful goal. And you can attribute a metric to that you can measure. And then you can then break that down into how much business do you need to bring in? How many customers do you need to help in order to make that number to hit that goal? That's an intrinsic goal. Or if you are like me, and I'm not necessarily motivated by like fancy cars, but I am motivated by having a green home and getting off the grid and being self-sufficient, and having an addition in a garage and a bigger office allows me to do that. I live on a lake in the middle of the woods. That's a personally meaningful goal for me. So it's as simple as having a conversation with your loved ones. What do we want the next 6 months to 12 months to look like? Is there a trip we want to take? Is there a renovation we want to do? Is there a memory or an experience, something that we want to do outside of our normal everyday budget activities? And then what's it going to take? What little extra things are we going to need to save away to get that done? How are we going to do that? And you can break that down into your performance plan, and you can assign a timeline to it, and you've shared it with your husband, share it with your manager. And then when you're asking for feedback, it's all related to your plan so you can reach your goal. And that's I actually was walking through my yard today, and I had found a couple of months ago, going through old paperwork, I found the original pictures of our house when we bought it. And I was walking around today and I'm going, oh my God, this is not even the same property, all because of the little graph papers that I started drawing 10 years ago and started building the business based on how I wanted to remodel my home, to be perfectly honest.
I love that. Progress really does happen step by step though. And like to that take on goal setting, it's not like, oh, we just bought a house one day. And the goal isn't even, I want to buy a house. The goal is, I want to save $10,000 by the end of 2025 to have enough money to buy a house. And then it is figuring out what you're going to sacrifice or what you're going to add or how you're going to come up with that money. And then another 10 years later, you're looking back at a beautiful off the grid house in Maine.
Great. So I'll add this one thing to it. Like I have a lot of people that when I ask them what their personally meaningful goals is, they want to be sales manager. They want to be this, they want to buy a house. And it's like, okay, everybody wants that. So what? What does it mean to you?
Yeah,
for example, Mauricio, who I mentioned in the book, wanted to be off his plan and become a sales manager to prove to his dad that he could do this, to prove to himself that he could do this. I had others who getting a home for them as someone who came over here from another country meant safety, security, a piece of something that they could have never had before. It wasn't just, okay, I'm buying a house because everybody's buying a house. Everybody has a reason for the things that they want or the experiences that they go after. Our job as managers and leaders is to just help them to find it. It's not to define it.
Ooh, it's interesting because that was maybe my first actual aha moment as a sales leader in my early 20s, when I started pivoting my one-on-ones where we were setting goals to ask them what they would spend the money on.
Yeah.
And then I was having conversations about taking their kids to Disneyland or helping their mom pay off their house or buying whatever it was. And it was such a fundamental shift in the ability to connect with folks. Not about like, you didn't make enough calls today, but like, oh my gosh, so what are we going to do to make sure that you can achieve X so that you can take those kids to Disneyland? Oh, powerful stuff.
Well, there's one last thing to this too. Yeah. When we're setting goals and we're helping our team set personally meaningful goals, it also sets them up to be able to understand the goals that are meaningful to their buyers. Because if we don't know what it is for ourselves, we're never going to be able to ask the questions to help someone else figure it out.
Facts. So good. All of it was so good. Not surprisingly, it was difficult for me to create a reasonable number of questions. But I was like, I know that we're going to like jabber in between as well. So you got to trim it down, Leslie. This was such a treat. The book was great. For anybody that has not yet read it, where can they order a copy?
So if you go to my website at carolmahoney.com and click on books, you'll see your ability to order on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or my favorite, your local bookstore. And also for anyone who orders the book this year, I'm doing a monthly free group coaching session for anyone who signs up. So on that same order page, just scroll down a little bit, enter your order info, and you will be in for the next one, which is in November, and then we'll do December. And if we have enough, well, maybe we'll do it a little longer next year.
Oh, that's a very generous offer. Okay, folks, run, don't walk over to carolmahoney.com and get your book. Carol, such a pleasure. Thank you so much for being here. And
Thank
just
you
a
for having
reminder, folks, we will be back. We'll be back with Song of Significance by Seth Godin. That's the regular book club is the first Tuesday of every month. So we'll be back in 2 weeks with that book club. And I figured out how to do normal font size. So if anybody is interested in learning more, 7-day free trial on Patreon or month to month, and then an annual option at Gumroad under those links. Or obviously, I live on LinkedIn, so you can just find me if you have any questions. Carol, thank you again so much, and thank you to everybody that joined us. Have a
Thank
great
you
night.
so much. Bye, everybody.